Minnesota Land Trust, and she's going to be here to guide us through the conservation easement piece. When she concludes her presentation, staff and Sarah will stick around for questions, and I'm sure there's probably some folks in the audience that would also like to comment on this as well. So with that, Sarah from Minnesota Land Trust.
Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. It's my pleasure to be here again this evening. I think it's been some time since I've been here with you. And really my goal this evening is to provide an update on where we're at with the conservation easement project and then answer any questions you might have about the status or what the next steps might be. So again, what I want to do is provide a project status update. I'm going to focus in a little bit on the Priory, and I'll talk about why we're kind of focusing in on the Priory and what that entails. I'll briefly touch on kind of if we continue to go forward, what the ongoing responsibilities would be both for the Minnesota Land Trust and the City of Maplewood, and again, some next steps should the city decide to proceed with this project, and then answer any questions any of you might have. Kind of starting, I just want to provide a recap of where we've been. This project started back in 2007. The Minnesota Land Trust was asked by the city to enter into this project really to, I have two goals up here, to determine whether conservation easements were a potential tool to achieve some permanent protection of your neighborhood preserves. And then secondly, if it was determined that might be a possibility, then to develop a proposal for implementing conservation easements on these preserves. We started then looking at this process, looking at and trying to determine whether conservation easements would seem to be a viable tool for land protection specific to the neighborhood preserves in Maplewood. And when we finished our initial evaluation, you may recall we I came back and staff came forward with a recommendation that we start exploring 5 Tier 1 sites. We kind of whittled it down from the whole suite of neighborhood preserves really to 5 sites. And that was because one of the things we felt was really important is that we should only look at those sites where there had been some kind of public process that discussed future use of these areas. And so these were the 5 sites: Priory, Jim's Prairie, Joy Park, Applewood, and Beaver Creek, that had master plans developed that involved some public participation in them. So in October 2007, Council saw this proposal, approved us going forward, which we did. As we got further into some of the details, we sat down with staff and really decided to focus in on 2 sites, the Priory and Jim's Prairie, because those were 2 really high priority sites, 2 really unique sites for the city, and it seemed like that was the best place to start. I worked with staff to draft some terms of easements for those 2 sites, and we brought that information to the Parks Commission. We had a good discussion with the Parks Commission, and after listening to that discussion and some of the concerns and comments that were raised, we're now recommending that we not continue to pursue an easement on Jim's Prairie and that we really just focus on the Priory. And the reason for this is that the primary threat, I think, to Jim's Prairie is not a threat of development, but it's really a threat of the lack of management. Jim's Prairie is a wonderful natural site, has a wonderful diverse prairie, and in order to maintain that, it's really important that that site be managed. And that's really, I think, where the city's efforts might be best placed. If we were to try to protect it through an easement, the easement would need to contain some more prescriptive language about management, and I think there were some concerns we heard from the Park Commission about how that might all work. And so given that, we're just recommending we really focus on the Priory. And I think the other reason for focusing on the Priory is that it really is one of the jewels or one of the signatures of the city's open space preserve system. And the other thing that I think is neat about this is you'll recall when we started this process, and I know I was asked, has any other city done this? And the answer, quite frankly, was no, to the extent that Maplewood wasn't looking initially to use the conservation easements at the scope and scale of a whole preserve system. But certainly a number of communities have protected a park or a couple of parks as really a signature park, signature natural area for their community. And so it's kind of looking at this idea of that signature park, signature natural area that I'm now thinking we might consider approaching towards the Priory. The commonalities of these signature natural areas, there's kind of three goals that are common in the communities that have done this. One is to maintain a scenic character within the community to help provide a contrast to the otherwise developed landscape. The second is to help protect and maintain and restore habitat for diversity of wildlife. And then finally, to provide opportunities for low-impact recreation for members of the public to get out and really experience the out-of-doors in a natural setting as opposed to a more active recreation type of setting. Included in your packet was a whole set of examples of some of these signature parks from other communities. I've just highlighted two here in the presentation tonight. You can certainly read about the others that were listed in the packet. The first one that I'll just touch on really briefly is Sunfish Lake Park in Lake Elmo. And this is a 250-acre natural area park in the city of Lake Elmo. We haven't quite closed on this one yet. We're resolving some title issues. But the City Council has approved going forward and have approved the specific terms of the easement, and we're hoping to finish this one up soon. It's a really wonderful natural area, very diverse in its topography and vegetation, and features, not surprisingly from the name, Sunfish Lake, and so provides an important point of access for that lake. And this particular park also ties in with a number of privately held properties that are permanently protected with conservation easements as well. The second example here is the Billings-Tomford Conservation Area in Red Wing, Minnesota, otherwise known as Coon Hill. This is a 93-acre park in the city of Red Wing. It's the city's largest and most prominent natural area park, and we've actually protected this in two phases with the city of Red Wing, but a wonderful feature for the city, and actually the city of Red Wing is now working with the Minnesota Land Trust to protect a second park, another large park area. So let me I've introduced that concept of kind of a signature park or signature natural area. I'll focus a little bit to the Priory, focusing there. Really the goals here, I think, were to protect the Priory for park uses and to ensure that park uses are consistent with this idea of passive recreation in a natural area park. There are a number of benefits that accrue to the public from this kind of opportunity. One is, first and foremost, I think it really provides the public an opportunity to learn about nature, experience an out-of-doors setting, again, different from the active recreation that we have maybe when we're out at the ball fields or out at the playground. This is a relatively undisturbed natural setting. Another benefit is that it protects the natural habitat and contributes to a larger complex of natural areas, woodlands, forests, wetlands. And I know now one of the things that's happened in the interim since I've been here is the city has been working on its comprehensive plan and has had an opportunity to look at greenways, and the Priory fits perfectly into that greenway system and that idea of creating a larger complex of habitat for wildlife to live within the city. And then finally, again, it's that scenic value in providing protection of a view shed and some natural undeveloped areas that, again, provide some scenic relief from an otherwise developed landscape that we're used to seeing in our lives now. Specifically, when we work on an easement for an area, we always initially determine the conservation values. You've heard me talk about that before, of that particular piece of land. So the conservation values of the Priory fall right in line with what those public values are that I've just described about signature parks. The first is preserving native prairie, grassland, woods, and wetland, which provide a habitat for a variety of species, and is specifically species in greatest conservation need, which is a listed suite of species that have been determined by the State Department of Natural Resources, and Minnesota now has a wildlife action plan that's all about protecting these species that we're at the greatest risk of losing. And so these habitats that are part of the Priory help provide habitat for those species in particular. Again, I just wanted to put up the map of the greenway system. As I mentioned, the Priory fits perfectly into one of these environmental corridor areas that the city has been developing through its comprehensive plan process.